The world of One Piece has a bunch of different races, but one of the most interesting among them is the Lunarians, a race of people said to have been gods and who lived on the Red Line. But what if Luffy himself were a Lunarian? Well, in order for this what if to play out, there would need to be 3 survivors of the Lunarian race. We know that Albert is the only survivor from the original series, but in this story, another boy and girl Lunarian who we will call Ethan and Clara would also survive. Unfortunately, the rarity of their bloodline didn't do these kids any good, since it was the reason why they were experimented on in the first place. Albert, Ethan, and Clara had extremely difficult childhoods, but despite being prisoners, the 3 bonded over their ordeal. But soon enough, a certain man would free the Lunarians, and this man was none other than Kaido. Kaido was also one of the research subjects in Punk Hazard, but he would go on to cause a mass breakout and escape with the Lunarians. This event was when Kaido formed his own crew, giving Albert the name King, while Clara and Ethan tagged along due to the fact that they had nowhere else to go. Many years would pass, and the crew would become massively influential around the world. Eventually, Kaido set his sights on the country of Wano, and so would begin the persecution of the Kozuki family. By this time, King, Ethan, and Clara had developed a deep bond. Despite their bond, Clara and Ethan didn't have the same ambitions as King to make Kaido the king of the pirates. They didn't like all the suffering the people of Wano were going through and became disillusioned with Kaido. At the same time, their similar views brought them closer together. It wasn't until Kozuki Oden's execution that Ethan and Clara would finally decide to leave Kaido's crew. Despite the fact that King was sorely against the idea of his 2 friends leaving, he eventually conceded and helped the 2 Lunarians find a solitary island to live on. King continued to keep tabs on the 2 as they spent their time together on the island, giving birth to a baby boy a few years later. That boy was named Luffy, but things wouldn't stay peaceful for long, as the world government soon caught wind of the existence of the 2 Lunarians. King got word that the Marines were heading towards the solitary island in an attempt to capture his friends, so he quickly set sail to get to them before the Marines could, but it was too late. On that fateful day, the Marines raided the island where Ethan and Clara had made their home and ravaged it. Despite being extremely capable fighters, the 2 didn't have backup and were soon overpowered by the Marines, giving up their lives to save their son. King arrived right as the Marines were done with their work and had captured the baby Luffy. Seeing the bodies of his friends, King flew into a rage, and along with the other pirates, he destroyed the remaining Marines and retrieved the young Luffy from their grasp. With no one left to take care of him, King took it upon himself to raise the child of his deceased friends and took Luffy to Wano. Luffy was raised on the island alongside a 10-year-old Yamato who was Kaido's son. As Luffy grew up, he was greatly influenced by Yamato and the people of Wano, growing up to be more rebellious and kind as opposed to being a ruthless pirate. Luffy, too, would grow to idolize Oden, and at the same time, he was trained to harness his abilities by King, developing his abilities from a young age. As a weapon, Luffy used a staff made of wood and would often spar with Yamato, who would wipe the floor with him. By the age of 14, Luffy was playing and training with Yamato in the forest one day when he fell into a hole in the ground. Yamato quickly followed Luffy into the hole, and the 2 stumbled upon a cave. Within the cave, they found a devil fruit. Luffy, being an absolute airhead, was quick to eat the fruit since he was hungry, and immediately afterward, he surprised Yamato by growing a tail. Since in this timeline, Luffy couldn't get the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika, he would need an equally powerful fruit to continue being the legendary protagonist of One Piece. After thinking long and hard, what better devil fruit could there be than the Saru Saru no Mi model Sun Wukong? During this time, Ace would stumble onto the country of Wano with his crewmates, but Kaido and his subordinates weren't present on the island at the time. Yamato would end up fighting the Spade pirate captain, with Luffy scrambling around as well. After their fight and realizing that Yamato hated Kaido too, they would go on to become friends with Ace. Luffy himself was very inspired by the Logia user, developing a quick bond with Ace. The 2 would spend some time together, with Ace giving Luffy some more pointers on how to use his flames. Ace eventually left Wano, but not before he, Yamato, and Luffy formed a bond. A few more years passed, and Luffy had gotten quite adept at using the Saru Saru no Mi, as well as his Lunarian traits, to become a very skilled fighter. His sparring sessions with Yamato had gotten quite intense, although the 2 didn't use their devil fruit abilities too much, as Yamato had sea stone cuffs on. Much like in the original timeline, Yamato wasn't on the best of terms with their father, considering they idolized the late Kozuki Oden. Kaido saw Yamato's admiration for Oden as a betrayal of their lineage. He tried to impose his will on Yamato, insisting that Yamato follow in his footsteps and become his heir. This is why Kaido punished Yamato, leading to a strained and abusive relationship. Despite the fact that Luffy, too, was heavily influenced by them, King made sure to knock him straight each time Luffy stepped out of line. Despite being an unwavering follower of Kaido, King still maintained a soft spot for Luffy, having a fatherly attachment to the young Lunarian. Meanwhile, Luffy continued training in the way of the staff. He frequently utilized his Zoan monkey form to gain increased agility and strength, significantly enhancing his abilities. His Zoan form accurately resembled a human-like macaque, even gaining better senses such as hearing and smell. Despite being home on the island, Luffy had a love for adventure and frequently pestered King to take him around the world with the rest of the Beast Pirates. When Luffy reached the age of 17, King finally took him along on one of his excursions, but beforehand, he gave Luffy Luffy a getup to hide his race. King gave Luffy a monk costume that fully covered him from head to toe, along with a face mask and a large straw hat that the Ronin used to wear. King would have preferred decking Luffy out in a full leather costume much like his own, but our young monkey wasn't too fond of the idea. Also, Yamato would probably beat him senseless if they ever saw Luffy in such attire. The two headed out with a few of the beast pirates, but King was the one primarily leading the ship. Their plan was to raid an island within Kaido's territory with the aim of defeating and killing a couple of rogue pirates found berating Kaido. The pirate captain's name was Bezel of the Flowing Wind Pirates. Luffy, King, and a couple of other beast pirates docked at one of the ports and began searching for the pirates. They soon found them in a tavern where they loudly boasted about made-up stories of their captain, Bezel, going toe-to-toe with Kaido and his beast pirates. The story was heavily exaggerated, but King realized that Bezel wasn't a complete pushover. King proceeded to kick one of the pirates straight into a wall, instantly knocking him out. This made the noise stop as the Flowing Wind Pirates suddenly recognized who was standing in front of them. Upon realizing that this was the infamous King, the captain, Bezel, immediately started panicking. King interrupted and told him that he'd let him live, but only if he could defeat Luffy in a battle to the death. This caught both our young hero and Bezel off guard. Bezel eyed Luffy in his monk appearance and estimated that this would be an easy opponent. He told King that this would be a piece of cake with his devil fruit and quickly became the wind. Bezel wielded the Logia-type devil fruit that allowed him to wield the powers of the wind. Despite the inherent strength of the devil fruit, Luffy wasn't too far from Bezel's power level, but he didn't know that as of yet. King told Luffy not to use his devil fruit, but rather to focus on defeating the pirate using his Haki and Lunarian abilities. While Luffy was trying to determine where the pirate was, he was suddenly stabbed in the back with a dagger. Fortunately, his Lunarian heritage meant that Luffy's resilience was on a whole other level. Luffy quickly retaliated and tried to punch Bezel, but the slippery devil had disappeared once again. Luffy focused his senses again and continued to get hit by Bezel. He'd finally had enough and hybridized his ears to better hear the movement of the wind. Before Bezel could attack another time, Luffy caught wind of him and retaliated with an exceptionally strong Haki-infused punch, sending the Logia user flying. Luffy then rushed towards Bezel before he could recover, infused his staff with armament Haki, and hit him straight in the stomach. The blow was strong enough to instantly knock the guy out. With a pat on the back from King, the two rounded up the rest of the pirates before taking them for Kaido's judgment. Luffy would go on to join King in a few more incursions, sparring and messing around with Yamato in the meantime, until one fateful day when word of Ace's execution reached Wano. Upon hearing the news, Luffy was distraught and mad that his friend was about to be executed. This was before King told him that Kaido intended to participate in the war. Luffy was kept in the dark about Kaido's true motives, and since he wasn't bright enough to actually dig deeper, he went along with the crew. Kaido himself was hell-bent on participating in one of the greatest wars of the era, and since he also had a spectacular death wish, Kaido went excitedly toward the war to have a chance at fighting Whitebeard. The crew set sail towards Marineford at around the same time Whitebeard himself did. Luffy stayed anxious on board, waiting to get to the island and have a shot at saving his friend. The road wouldn't be without hurdles, though, as a certain red-haired pirate showed up to stop Kaido. When Shanks, the red-haired Emperor of the Sea, received word that Kaido was preparing to attack Whitebeard, knowing the devastation this could bring, Shanks decided to intervene and stop Kaido from reaching Marineford. Kaido saw the red-haired pirate's ship and immediately began laughing loudly, his Haki spewing out. Shanks himself was focused, realizing that if Kaido reached Marineford, the war would escalate astronomically. Shanks released his own Haki in response to Kaido's, and the two conquerors had an exceptional clash. Half the crew on both sides collapsed from the sheer power of the Haki, and even Luffy was barely able to stay on his feet. In the next moment, Kaido jumped from his ship and transformed into the massive Azure Dragon. His body coiled around the sky, lightning crackling around him as he prepared to unleash a devastating attack. The sky darkened and the winds howled as Kaido's power began to gather. Shanks, undeterred, drew his sword Gryphon. The blade gleamed in the stormy light, and with a single motion, Shanks unleashed a wave of Haki so powerful that the sea itself recoiled. Kaido's dragon form descended like a storm, his jaws wide open, ready to obliterate everything in his path. But Shanks met him head-on, Gryphon clashing against Kaido's scales with a force that shook the area around them. The impact sent shockwaves through the ocean, creating massive tsunamis that threatened to engulf both pirate fleets. While battling it out with the colossal dragon, Shanks tried to reason with Kaido, telling him that Marineford wasn't the war he was waiting for, but rather, he needed to wait for the new generation of pirates who would end up stronger than the previous era. Kaido would not listen to reason, though, and continued clashing against the swordsman. Luffy watched this battle from the sidelines along with King and the rest of the pirates, in awe of how powerful these two Yonko were. During this time, Luffy asked King about who Shanks was and why he was trying to stop the beast pirates from going to help Ace. It was here that King told him that Kaido wasn't heading to Marineford with the intention of rescuing Ace, but rather wanted to participate in the war and fight Whitebeard. Luffy finally put two and two together and got angry at Kaido for trying to help in the execution of his friend. Eventually, Shanks delayed the strongest creature long enough to ensure that the time for joining the war would pass. Even Kaido realized that there would be no point in going to Marineford Marineford now, since the war would be nearly over. With this, the Azure Dragon transformed back into his normal form, disengaging from the fight. He told Shanks that he better be right about the next generation being stronger and ordered his crew to head back to Wano. The Beast Pirates began their journey back to Wano, but a certain someone was missing from the ship. Using his wings, Luffy discreetly sneaked off the Beast Pirates' ship and boarded the red-haired pirate's ship. Luffy was caught pretty quickly and began fighting off a few of the grunts who were trying to capture him. This was until Ben Beckman and Shanks himself showed up, causing the pirates to stop in their tracks. Shanks observed the pirate and asked him in a serious tone why a Lunarian had boarded his ship. Luffy's cover was blown since he had to take off his robe to actually fly to the ship. Shocked at his own stupidity, Luffy simply and adamantly stated that he wanted Shanks to take him to Marineford. Surprised, Shanks asked Luffy why he thought it was a good idea to board an enemy ship and then demand they set sail for the one place they were originally trying to keep the Beast Pirates from entering. Luffy simply stated that he needed to go save his friend. Intrigued by the young pirate on his ship and how he too had a straw hat of his own, Shanks told Luffy that he could accompany them to Marineford. Luffy traveled with Shanks to Marineford, only to find that Whitebeard had failed to save Ace from his execution. Considering we've reached a major point in the series, it's important to discuss how things would have changed in the original timeline since Luffy was no longer in the picture. All things considered, there would be major changes in the lives of the current Straw Hats. Their eventual paths would likely have taken darker or less fulfilling turns without Luffy's influence and inspiration. Without Luffy to save him from Helmeppo's dastardly trap, Zoro might have been executed by the Marines by the corrupt Captain Morgan. Even if he had survived, Zoro would likely have continued his life as a bounty hunter, wandering around aimlessly in pursuit of his dream to become the world's greatest swordsman. He wouldn't really be able to get too far without his original crew to support him. He wouldn't even get as strong as he is now since Luffy served as a major catalyst for his growth. His journey would have been lonely, and he might never have reached his full potential. Nami would have remained trapped under Arlong and would have continued being a thief to buy back her village. Her dream of drawing a map of the world's oceans would likewise have gone unfulfilled, and her spirit would soon have been broken by Arlong's oppression. Usopp would likely have remained in Syrup Village, continuing his life as a liar and prankster. Without Luffy around, Usopp would never have found the courage to stand up to Captain Kuro and protect his village, and may have even lost his life when Kuro commenced his plans. Sanji would have continued his life on the Baratie as a cook, and he wouldn't have ventured out into the world to search for the All Blue. He would have simply remained a humble cook under Zeph until Germa 66 learned of his whereabouts. This would quite possibly devolve into Sanji, becoming a part of the Big Mom Pirates, but we can speculate more about that when we get there. Chopper would have stayed alone on Drum Island, never learning to embrace his identity. His dream of becoming a great doctor would be slashed because he would never find someone who could show him the world and rely on him for his talents. Robin's fate would have been especially tragic without Luffy. She would have continued her life on the run, constantly pursued by the world government and never finding a place where she belonged. Without Luffy there to stop Crocodile's plans in Alabasta, Robin may have remained loyal to Crocodile or could have fallen into even worse hands. She could never uncover the history of the world with no one to protect her, and she would have been stuck in an endless cycle of trying to flee. Frankie's life would have continued to be the same, and he would never achieve his goal of building a ship that would reach the end of the Grand Line. Kobe would have been stuck under Alvida, but he would never have found the courage to pursue his dream. Brook would continue to be stuck in the Florian Triangle, his soul forever trapped without Luffy to find him. He would have stayed in isolation, being unable to fulfill his dream of reuniting with Laboon. Maybe he'd get out one day, but it seems incredibly unlikely unless someone comes along to help him out. Jinbe would have stayed stuck at Impel Down without anyone to break him out. Speaking of Impel Down, even Blackbeard would have been unable to form his crew, and as such, he would have been unable to take Whitebeard's Devil Fruit. Ace would still die in this timeline, but in this case, Whitebeard would have survived. Coming back to our story, Shanks arrived right when Ace was executed, and Whitebeard had flown into a rage. Upon his arrival, Shanks quickly intervened and put a stop to the clash between Whitebeard and the Marines. Luffy was in despair because Ace had passed away and wouldn't stop crying. His mixed emotions resulted in his haki spewing forth in the form of Conqueror's Haki, causing both Shanks and the Marines to be surprised at what was going on aboard Shanks' ship. Luckily, though, Luffy wasn't allowed to exit the ship due to his Lunarian heritage, though his existence would spell disaster for him as the Marines would begin chasing after the young pirate. Shanks successfully stopped the war from devolving into an even nastier affair, and Whitebeard and his crew left the island with Ace's body, dejected at the outcome. Shanks came back to his ship, where he had a talk with Luffy. Luffy decided that he wanted to live the way Ace used to live, and he also wanted to get even stronger than he was at the moment. To see the state of the world, he asked Shanks if he could travel with him. After thinking things over and understanding that Luffy had the potential to become a great pirate, Shanks decided to make him a part of his crew. For the next few months, Luffy would go on to follow the red-haired pirates and train under them. During this time, Shanks grew fond of Luffy and realized that he had the potential to be as strong as a Yonko. Luffy became better at handling his devil fruit and could even hybridize his entire body at this point, gaining incredible resilience, strength, and speed. During his travels with Shanks, Luffy learned of the devil fruit Shanks was safeguarding and about the legend of Nika. Shanks joked joked around with Luffy that the devil fruit he had in the hull of the ship was actually Nika himself, and said that he would have probably given Luffy the devil fruit if he didn't already possess the Saru Saru no Mi. While traveling with Shanks, Luffy grew by leaps and bounds. He had the opportunity to witness the greatest swordsman in the world, Dracula Mihawk, fight against Shanks. The fight was nothing like he had ever seen and was even better than King's swordsmanship. Remember that since Shanks never met Luffy, he never sacrificed his arm and as such would continue to be a rival to the famous Mihawk. After more than a year, Shanks would learn of Whitebeard's condition and how his wounds and illness had him on his deathbed. To pay his respects, Shanks went to meet the Emperor and had one final chat with him. After spending so much time with Shanks and the red-haired pirates, Luffy had grown to the point where he could be considered an extremely capable fighter, possibly even better than Ace. He had mastered the different forms of haki and even learned how to utilize his conqueror's haki as a weapon. He would frequently spar with Shanks, and although far from defeating the man, he could still hold his own while fighting against him. Seeing the state of the world and learning more about One Piece, Luffy decided that he wanted to form his own crew. And he had just the right person for the job, his childhood friend Yamato. Luffy decided to head back to Wano and free his childhood friend from Kaido's grasp. Before sending Luffy off to start his own adventure, Shanks replaced the straw hat Luffy currently owned with the one he had, given to him by Goldie Roger. Luffy was dropped off near Wano, and he went back to his country. Upon reaching it, Luffy would soon meet up with King, who had caught word that his adoptive son was back on the island. The first thing the two do is clash in a spectacular spar. With everything Luffy had learned during his travels with Shanks, even King was surprised to see how far he had come. The two Lunarians found an isolated place and began duking it out, ravaging the area around them. After a long and arduous match, Luffy's resilience paid off, and King realized that he may have actually surpassed him. Out of breath from the battle, King and Luffy lay down on the ground. When King asked about his travels across the world, Luffy told him everything he had witnessed and how he had grown before finally telling King that he was back for Yamato and to form his crew to find the One Piece. Hearing this ridiculous statement, King began laughing wholeheartedly. He didn't believe that the young pirate could possibly pull this off and told him that Kaido wouldn't let Luffy take his son right under his nose. Luffy stated that he'd even fight against Kaido if it got to that point. Realizing that Luffy was serious, King jested and said that if he was able to take down Kaido, then even he himself might be willing to follow the boy on his journey. With his goal set, Luffy headed for Yamato and met up with him. Yamato was still bound with cuffs, rigged to explode on removal, so Luffy did what any normal person would do. He used his newly developed strength and ripped them off before throwing them away. The ensuing explosion within the castle caused a drunk Kaido to divert his attention towards it. With Yamato released, the two began fighting through the beast pirates, making their way to the roof of the castle when suddenly Kaido appeared in his Azure dragon form. Yamato lashed out at Kaido for actually rigging the cuffs, but Kaido simply laughed it off, stating that they wouldn't be escaping the island. Upon hearing this, both Luffy and Yamato challenged the massive dragon to a fight. Kaido simply laughed it off and unleashed his conqueror's haki, only to be met with a combination of Yamato's and Luffy's. Seeing that the two aren't messing around, Kaido breaks from his drunken stupor and the fight begins in earnest. Both Luffy and Yamato go into their hybrid forms and begin attacking Kaido. Their blows have some clear power behind them, coming as quite a shock to the dragon. Kaido soon returns to his normal form and fights the two with his massive Kanabo mace. The fight intensifies, but Kaido begins to overpower the two Zoan users. Kaido soon catches Yamato off guard and tries to bash them with an exceptional blow, but Luffy steps in and takes the hit, only to be sent flying as the flames on his back disappear. Yamato, although immensely worried about Luffy, isn't given the chance to check on their friend. The father-son duo continues the fight as Luffy lies unconscious until his body starts transforming, as dark clouds begin forming in the air above them. Luffy awakens with half his body covered in golden fur. A crown made of black-white smoke appears on his head, and the flames on Luffy's back turn white as well. His wings retreat into his back, and a plume of white smoke forms under his feet. As he stands up, his staff begins to glow with power. Luffy regains consciousness as his devil fruit awakens, turning him into the mythical Monkey King, Sun Wukong. Surprised by the sudden turn of events, Luffy uses the cloud-like smoke under his feet and rushes toward Kaido, hitting him hard in the stomach with his staff, sending the beast flying back. His newfound power would be in a realm of its own as Luffy gained an astounding amount of strength, speed, and abilities. He could shapeshift at will, and now his staff could increase and decrease in size to serve as a weapon both at long and short distances. With his new powers imbued with Conqueror's haki, Luffy and Yamato would eventually succeed in defeating the Emperor of the Sea before quickly making enough of an opening to escape the land of Wano. As promised, King would join up with Luffy, and the three would form the Straw Hat Pirates. It wouldn't be long before the world government caught wind of the two and their identities as Lunarians, since Luffy is anything but subtle, and soon even the Marines would be after the newly formed pirate crew. Luffy would move on to bolster his ranks while sailing across the New World, and could possibly find both old and new allies. His crew wouldn't be anything to scoff at anyway, so it wouldn't be a long shot to say that it would lead to a very different and pretty spectacular story. Maybe the two Lunarians would try to get back to the Red Line, and for sure, they would butt heads with the Marines and and possibly even the Gorosei. If you liked the video, make sure to click the like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell for more videos like this one.